recommend that we use single-use bottles, nipples, etc. Everything is disinfected. The formula prepared in advance should be done daily. It should be kept at or less than 4 degrees centigrade and discarded if not used in 24 hours. And this is one that's caused a lot of problems for us. We don't use a lot of continuous feeds, but when we do, the requirement is that we change out the syringe every 4 hours in that tube feeding. Lo siguiente. Now, that's easy. Hospitals are easy. The real headache has been what to do at home. How do we advise families about taking care of their infant when they're using formula at home? And we can't just imagine that no baby goes home on infant formula. Of course they do. Families of high-risk formula-fed infants should be aware that powdered infant formula is not sterile. Encouraged to use a liquid formula when it's possible. It's not always possible. Inactivation of Sakazaki in infant formula occurs at temperatures of 60 degrees or higher. The European Nutrition Society, ESPGHAN, however, does not recommend that the formula be heated up to high temperatures due to the potential for nutrient loss when that's done, and I'll show you some data about that in just a minute. And it's not included in most U.S. guidelines or the guidelines at our hospital. TCH stands for my hospital, Texas Children's Hospital. In fact, detailed specific guidelines don't exist. There are no published guidelines for the use of powdered infant formula at home that are consistent. Some people have been concerned and have limited the use of powdered infant formulas through 44 weeks post-menstrual age, but again, those are not necessarily evidence-based guidelines, but just based on the concern that cases of infection occurred in the first month of life in full-term infants. Lo siguiente. Now, one of the interesting things that what happens when you look at data and methodologies is that we kind of tend to believe things, and then when you look at them, they're not always true. And one of the things I always believed is if you heat formula up to a high temperature, you must destroy everything that's in it, and all the nutrients must be destroyed. In reality, that's not necessarily the case. There's a lot of food scientists that have taken this issue on and really begun to look at how can we prepare formula so that we don't lose nutrients but decrease the risk of infection. And this is an active area of research among formula companies and among nutritional researchers. In fact, when you take water and you boil it and then you add it immediately to the powder, okay, something we don't recommend doing because of the loss of nutrients. In fact, the only nutrient that was really lost was a good bit of the vitamin C, and in fact, with one formula it was about 30%, with another about 60%, and generally still leaving the babies with plenty of vitamin C left. There was no effect on a wide range. I didn't show them all here, but a wide range of other micronutrients and vitamins had very little effect from boiling and then adding boiling water directly to the powder. La siguiente. All right, I'm going to speak just briefly about fortification of human milk. Much of this was covered in some of the other talks. I just wanted to kind of make a couple of points briefly. La siguiente. Okay, much of this has been covered already. I just wanted to remind you that our indications for fortification of mother's milk are a mother who doesn't have enough milk, a baby whose volume of intake is restricted because of dysplasia, the inadequate content of nutrients that was generally covered. Usually we use fortification for babies with birth weight of less than about 1.5 to 1.8 kilos, and the use of donated human milk in this process is still under investigation. La siguiente. When we look at human milk fortification, we can ask how much of an increase using commonly available fortificants occurs in specific nutrients. And so if we look at the increase, and this is the increase in the content of the nutrients with fortification, you can see that the largest increase occurs in the calcium and phosphorus, zinc, and the vitamins. The intake in energy, protein are all significant, but not quite as large on this scale as opposed to the several 100% that occur with fortification. La siguiente. this has been talked about a little bit, but I think it's worth going over one more time, is that we really have 3 different methods for adding and fortifying human milk. In the United States, we generally have powdered, prepared formulas. They're in small paquetas that are available for use. They are not necessarily sterile, but there's never been a case of infection associated with them, and they're widely used. They are, however, Kyle, one can also add powdered infant formula. For example, one can add a preterm formula as a scoop and add it to mother's milk directly. This has the benefit of being considerably less expensive. One can use 1 can for multiple babies. It has the disadvantage of, again, going back into that can of multiple times to do that. And then you could add fortificantes individuales for carbohydrates, protein, or fat directly. La siguiente. One of the important questions that can be asked about the use of human milk fortifiers is it safe for the baby? There has been a single study that suggested that there was an increased risk of enterocolitis necrotizante with the use of leche materna fortificada. This was from Hallstrom in 2003. And when we take a look at this study more carefully, in fact, this was not a controlled trial. And most importantly, there was a huge difference in the weights of the babies who got enterocolitis necrotizante versus those who didn't. And in fact, the babies who got NEC had a much higher use of dexamethasone. So really, this study, which is sometimes quoted as a risk of enterocolitis, does not provide any real evidence for an increased risk of enterocolitis. La siguiente. There are other studies, in fact, which suggest that fortifying human milk has a protective effect, less infections, and a lower incidence of enterocolitis. We conclude, and the overwhelming conclusion, I think, of the data, are that fortification of human milk is safe for premature babies. La siguiente. In this study, going back again to Alan Lucas's data, when they looked at babies who were fortified versus control babies, abdominal distension, emesis were not different. The stooling pattern was similar. What there was a slight increase in the gastric aspirate. This was not clinically significant, although it was statistically significant. La siguiente. So since 1988, the American Academy of Pediatrics has advised that the use of fortified human milk is appropriate for preterm babies. La siguiente. Now, was talked about here the fact we really don't know how to begin enteral feeds in babies. I'll also tell you that we don't entirely know when to start fortification and when to stop it. Common practice, but not necessarily evidence-based practice, is to start fortification when the baby gets to about 100 ml per kilo per day of feedings, or after about 1 week of enteral nutrition if the progress of feedings is slow. And common practice is often to stop fortification shortly before the baby goes home, when the baby's about 35 weeks post-menstrual age, or is about 2 kilos. Again, these are general practices. La siguiente. A little bit about vitamins and iron. Dr. Georgia spoke about iron a little bit. Those babies who receive mother's milk without fortification need additional vitamin D, just like all babies need vitamin D. We tend to start for the breastfed babies, he was talking about the transitional formulas, we tend to start iron when the babies reach a full volume of human milk using 2 milligrams per kilo per day. Again, some people use 3 to 4 milligrams per kilo per day. As was mentioned, clearly one needs to use iron throughout the first year of life in babies who are low birth weight. La siguiente. When people have looked at the safety of fortified human milk and the efficacy, this is from the Cochrane review in 2005. Not unexpectedly, the growth was significantly better in babies who received fortified human milk. bone mineral content, nitrogen balance were all better, and there was no significant difference in the relative risk of feeding intolerance, necrotizing enterocolitis, or death. Now I'm going to just make one tiny caveat about this, and that's the fact that this number is not 1.0. Some people have looked at these data and said that we still need more evidence about the safety of human milk fortification. John Tyson, who's an outstanding neonatologist and epidemiologist at the University of Texas at Houston, has told me many times that he's not 100% convinced that these data prove safety. Nonetheless, most of us generally accept that these data demonstrate the safety of human milk fortification. La siguiente. Now, Dr. Ziegler presented this study, and I didn't know he was going to talk about this study, but I'm going to talk about it again because it is an important study and because it was done at my institution. And I would also first comment that I had absolutely nothing to do with this study, other than the fact I was a neonatologist there. But I think he went over it in a certain degree of detail, but it's an important study, and I'm going to go over it again. This was a randomized blinded trial comparing infection-related events among extremely preterm infants fed their own mother's milk, donor human milk, or preterm formula. Infants who are less than 30 weeks gestation were randomly assigned to receive pasteurized donor human milk or preterm formula if their own supply of mother's milk became insufficient during the study. La siguiente. Now the outcomes of the study were as Dr. Ziegler described in this slide. It actually looks a little nicer than what I cut and pasted off the actual article, but let me go through with it again. There were no differences